Have you been in a lot of boring meetings lately? Have your Zoom calls been turning to idle chit-chat? Has your boss assigned you a new project without you even understanding what you're supposed to do? Well, it might be time to try a new approach. Asking coaching questions, even though you're not a manager. Hi, I'm Ria, a communications lead at a rising Y Combinator startup. And on this channel, I'm going to teach you how to excel in your first startup job by networking within the company, developing better work habits, and learning new skills. My tea of the day is Twinings Cherry and Cinnamon.
Spicy.
You might be wondering, why should you ask questions? As we already established, you're not a manager. Who cares? You're just there to listen to instructions from your boss and then to just go along and be done. Who cares? I care, and you should care too. The benefit of this is not just to make your meetings a little less boring and a little more purposeful, but it's also to help you excel in your job and maybe one day become manager if you do well enough. People who ask questions tend to get further. Let's think about it from the perspective of the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule. You might have heard of this, it's pretty popular, but basically it says that 20% of efforts lead to 80% of results. So ideally, you want to focus on that 20% that brings you the most results. And how are you gonna know what are the most important things to be working on if you don't ask any questions? You don't know everything. I'm sorry, I know you seem pretty smart, I believe you, but you don't know a lot of things. And you need to accept that, and you need to start asking people questions. Because you can't read minds. I wish I could. I sometimes like to say that I can, but I can't. And I can guarantee that none of you watching this can either. You might have been in this situation before. You start talking, but you're talking not because you know what to say, but in order to figure out what the other person wants you to say. So you keep talking and beating around the bush and being a little roundabout and trying different approaches and seeing the facial expressions of the person you're talking to in order to judge how they're responding and whether they like what you're saying. And then when you start getting that little hint of smile, then you start talking that way more and more and more, and you're basically doing all the work and figuring out what they want without asking them. Well, here's a revelation. Why not just ask them and, spare yourself minutes of painful effort and free up some time on your schedule for more important things, gosh darn it. So I read this book. And I read it because I'm hoping to become a manager soon, so I'm doing all of these management courses. But as I read it, I realized that it has so much value for non-managers as well. I'm not a manager right now, but I've already been applying all of these coaching questions in my life and in my work. Wow. And it's honestly so useful. I think you could use it even as a student if you're a student. You can use it anywhere, in any conversation with anyone ever, you can use this. So my boyfriend actually has coaching training. He was part of this program called Sustained Dialogue in our university back when he was a student. And it was basically a bunch of people were trained to be dialogue facilitators, which is basically the same thing as a coach. So they were taught how to ask good questions in order to get people to, give meaningful answers and how to lead discussion in a way that was productive and almost therapeutic. I always thought it was a really cool skill, and I've asked him a lot about it, but I don't quite know how to do it. I've gotten a little bit of training working in the writing center where I worked as a student. I'm pretty good at asking questions, but I'm not great. I have room to learn. And I feel like now, with this book, I actually know exactly what to do. And I think I can become pretty great at asking questions as long as I implement all of this advice that I'm about to tell you right now. And it's super simple. It's literally just 6 questions that you need to ask. And I will tell you exactly how to ask even though you're not the boss. Question number 1 is an opening question, and it's, what's on your mind? And this question might seem like it's impossible to ask if you're not the boss. Because of course it's easy for your boss to be like, so what's on your mind, Jumana? Tell me, how are you doing? But it would be weird if you go into the meeting with your boss and you're like, boss, what's on your mind? That wouldn't work. So there are multiple scenarios in which you can use this question. Scenario number 1, if they set up the meeting. If they're your boss or if they're your coworker, doesn't matter. They set up the meeting, which means they want something from you. And because they want something from you, that means that you can ask, what's on your mind? Why'd you set up this meeting, Have that be as an opening question. Take the lead. Show initiative. They'll like that. If you set up in the meeting, on the other hand, it would be really weird if, I called you in and you're here expecting to see why I called you in, and I'm like,
What's on your mind?
you would feel like I'm just wasting your time and I called you in for no reason, which is super frustrating. So don't do that. Instead, ask this question with a clarification like, so what have you been thinking about the expansion project? Or if you want to talk about what this person has been up to in the last week, be like, so what have you been thinking in the last week? The point of this question is to give them the space to address what is most important to them. Let them lead the conversation and you are there to just listen. If it's a group meeting, you can ask the question, what's on your mind, to the people who haven't been saying much in order to get their participation. So if John hasn't been saying anything all meeting and you want to know what John is thinking, you can be like,
Guys, shut up. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
okay, don't tell people to shut up, but maybe do. I tell people to shut up sometimes. Second question, and this is the easiest one to ask. Just ask, and what else? And the reason for this question, it seems so stupid, but it's so easy to forget that people don't always tell us everything they are thinking about on the first try. Sometimes it's because they don't want to bore you with a long answer, and sometimes it's because they think they've answered your question, but if you prod them a little more, poke them in there, then they'll actually come up with more things to say. But you want them to express everything that they're thinking, because the second or the third or the fourth thing they might say might be the most useful one. So you need to be able to channel that. So just keep asking them, and what else? And what else? And are you thinking about anything else? Is there anything else you can think of? Keep asking them that until you explicitly hear, no, there's nothing else. And of course, there's a time and place for these questions. Like, if they're like, yo, Ria, can you change the water bottle in the cooler? You wouldn't be like, no. You're not stupid. You'll know when to ask this question. Number 3, and this is the real kicker. I actually think this might be the most important question here. Ask, what is the real challenge here for you? And the for you part is important because you don't want them to just think, oh, what could be the most difficult for some hypothetical typical person? You want to know, what are they struggling with? Yeah, it's hard to ask this if you're not the boss. You would feel like this is the boss kind of question, but actually there are ways that you can ask it even if you're talking to just another person, another coworker, or your own boss. If you're talking to a coworker, you can ask this to figure out what the real problem is. You're talking about a project that you're working on together. You're working on the strategy for sales in Mexico together, and the person is telling you that, it's been slow on their end, so you want to pick up the slack a little bit. So you're like, okay, so what's been the real challenge here for you? Why have you been struggling to meet our quotas? And now you know some useful information and you can help them. Baboom! If you're talking to your boss, this question is actually to figure out how you can help them best. This works if your boss is chatty, so start talking to them and be like, what have you been up to? They start telling you, or if they're just introducing a new project, they're like, we've been working on this new project of expanding to Mexico. Let's just keep using that as an example. And you're like, okay, and what has been the real challenge here for you? What has been the hardest part to accomplish? And then they tell you. And then if you can help them with that, you can just go, I can help. And now you're the superhero. Ba-boom! Now, this is a really scary question, but also one of the most useful ones. And it's, what do you want? And it's really hard to ask this question if you're not the boss, because people will think that you're super rude. So there are more delicate ways to ask this question, but still get the desired outcome. To see, what does this person actually desire? They can give you a very long description of a project without you having a good idea of what they actually want from you. And in this way, you can just say, and what do you want to get out of this project or task? Or, what outcome are you hoping for? In order to get a better picture, in order to get a more clear picture of what they want and consequently how you can help them. So now, once you've figured out what they want, you ask the next question. And that is, how can I help? You already probably have a pretty good idea of how you can help, but don't assume. Never assume anything. That's the whole point of coaching. You do not assume, you ask. So, your boss has told you that the expansion project in Mexico has been really challenging, and they really want somebody who is good at talking to enterprise clients and has experience of that, and you have that experience, so you would want to help them, but they might have something else in mind for you, Or they might see an even more beneficial way that you can help this project that you're not seeing. So just ask, how can I help? This shows initiative instead of you just assuming, that just makes them feel better. It makes them feel like they're more in control, which, whether it's your boss or your colleague, you want them to feel like they're in control because they'll like you more. This way you get a good idea of how they see you fitting into the situation, rather than having to do all the work yourself. The point of coaching is you get to do the least amount of work that you need to in a conversation. You're just sitting there listening. And please, by all means, actually listen and pay attention. But you don't need to do that much. Just ask some good questions. The last question is about strategic planning. And this question is, if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? And if you're talking to a colleague, this would be when you're helping them figure out how to approach something. They're trying to figure out how to prioritize multiple projects or deadlines or whatever. And they're like, oh, I think I'm going to take up this extra task. It would be really helpful for them if you can ask them, if you're saying yes to this task, what other things are you saying no to? What are you going to have to subtract time away from? Which would be super helpful, and they're going to love you because you're a great friend and colleague. Now, if you talk to your boss, you can still ask this question in order to help them think more strategically. This might be because you think they haven't thought all of this through or they're expecting too much from you. Then ask using the pronoun we instead of you. So ask, if we're saying yes to this, what are we saying no to? This is a very polite way of telling your boss that something has to give in, and you want them to decide what that has to be and them to set the priorities so that they're happy. I think, and this is my promise to you, if you start asking these questions in your job, in your interactions with coworkers and your bosses, you are going to be a better employee. Everyone will like you more because you're going to be a good listener, and everyone loves a good listener, and honestly, in a startup, that's really good. And you're improving the company communication, which, woo! And now you're doing whatever people most want done from you, and you always have perfect clarity in what the expectations are, which makes you a better employee all around, not just in communication. And maybe soon enough you're going to be reading this book because you became a manager, and then you can thank me. So if you enjoyed this video, you might want to hear more productivity tips from me. If so, I recommend that you check out my latest video about the 5 habits that you can adopt before the end of 2021 to make you a more successful, more happy, more fulfilled version of yourself. Check it out. There's a link down in the description and on the side of the screen here. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye!